Hello and welcome to folks as you come on into the meeting. We'll be getting going here at 6 o'clock promptly. Thanks for joining us here. We'll go ahead and we got about 1 minute to go, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our workshop this evening. And we'll get started here in 1 more minute, giving folks a chance to join. And at 6:01, we'll get started with our program for the night. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who have joined, we're using meeting mode tonight to facilitate more conversation than using webinar, but I invite you to keep your cameras off. And we'll cover this in a bit, but when we want to get public comments and engagement, we can unmute yourself. And that way, if you're wearing pajamas at 6 o'clock at night, it's okay. You can have the anonymity of having your camera off. Okay, well, it's 6:01. Let's get on with the show tonight. Thank you very much for coming to the City of 29 Palms Redistricting Workshop. I'm assisted this evening by Ali and Danielle on my team, who are manning the back end of Zoom and handling the PowerPoint decks. So Ali, if you'd advance the next slide, please. I want to introduce myself real quick. My name is Ryder. I'm with Tripepi Smith. We are a marketing communications public affairs firm that works in about 100 plus cities in the state of California, all up and down the state, as far north as Yuba City, as far south down as Coronado Island and Carlsbad and Poway, and obviously excited to be working with the City of 29 Palms as well. And I'm joined tonight by Todd with National Demographics Corporation, or NDC. Todd, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ryder.
Yeah, absolutely. So NDC is the state's preeminent demography firm. They've done probably 90% of the demography or the district formation projects for local government agencies in the state of California, have a long record of working in this space, and one of the most expert teams in redistricting and district formation in the state of California. They were involved in the original district formation process in the city of 29 Palms, as I recall. So the organization itself comes with some institutional knowledge and history about the district formation process. Let's go to the next slide. So tonight's schedule, we started right here at 6 o'clock, 6:01, I guess, to be fair. And we expect to go till about 7:30. And given how many folks are on the line here, I wouldn't expect we'll have to go much past 7:30, maybe even end sooner than that. But fundamentally, our tonight's schedule is to meet and talk. We're going to go through process, rules, and goals, and Todd's going to walk us through those elements. We're going to discuss mapping tools. And we're going to have a conversation about neighborhoods and communities of interest. And actually, we're going to flip the order on that tonight. We're going to do neighborhoods and communities of interest. Then we're going to get into mapping tools. And then when we're done the mapping tools demo that Todd's going to run through, we're going to go on to talking about the next steps in this redistricting process that we've engaged in here for the city of 29 Palms. Next slide. So real quick too, just for some quick Zoom instructions, go ahead and keep your video off during the workshop. If you'd like to speak during the discussion, just go ahead and use the raise hand feature and we'll unmute you. We have a designated time for asking some questions after we get through Todd's initial presentation. So if you could just kind of hold your questions till we get to that phase, that would be really appreciated. I also want to go out of my way and make a point to note now that this whole session is being recorded. And we're recording this because the goal is to record tonight's conversation, any questions you have, any communities of interest that you help identify. And we want to use that information as part of the public record. We want total transparency in this process. And we'll be posting this recording up on the website for the redistricting process. So that it'll be available for other members of the community who are unable to be here tonight. So the city was very clear that they wanted to make sure we created an asset and a tool for the community to make sure that they could be properly informed and get the benefit of being at the workshop virtually or I guess in an asynchronous fashion, even if they couldn't be with us tonight. When it is your turn to speak or when we're ready to unmute you, we'll go ahead and handle that. We'll capture your audio and your question, or we'll capture your feedback on communities of interest, and then we'll put you back on mute so that if your cat decides to get in a cat fight in the background, we aren't going to have to hear it go crazy. Next slide. So tonight's goals. First and foremost, you learn from the experts of redistricting and district formation work is very esoteric, and it's complicated by laws, numerous federal laws and state laws and processes that are involved. And generally speaking, although in the city of 29 Palms, you had to do this relatively recently with your district formation process, so it hasn't quite been 10 years, but in future circumstances, the next time you'll be redistricting will be in 2031. Hard to believe. So the point is, this isn't a very frequent activity. And as a result, it's great to make sure you're fully updated on what the latest and greatest is in the rules and the processes that are driving this process for the city. And our goal is to help inform you of all those factors tonight and through the public hearing processes that are going on. After you've listened to what we are going to hear from Todd tonight and myself, hopefully I'll add some additional value. Then we're going to review mapping tools, and we're going to listen to you. Right? Our goal is we might be experts on redistricting processes, but you are experts on the city of 29 Palms. So our goal is to hear from you, and particularly with interest on communities of interest and neighborhoods that we want to make sure stay held together in the course of the redistricting process. And then last but not least, our goal is that you leave tonight empowered and informed so that you can not only give effective feedback in the process to Todd in this process and NDC in general, but that you also can go talk to your neighbors and your friends down the street and the folks you meet at church and the folks you see in the grocery store, and make sure that they're aware of this process because we certainly welcome as much community involvement as possible throughout the effort. Next slide. And then I just want to take a broader moment to talk about democracy in general, right? Democracy works better when the people are involved and engaged. A disinterested public, when democracy is taking place, starts to break down the effects and the benefits of democracy. So fundamentally, we believe that it's important that you as residents and members of the community are involved and informed in this process and engaged in it. Number two, we need you to be involved because you are experts in your community. You are experts about your neighborhoods. You know these places better than we do. So we need to hear from you and make sure that your expertise is being leveraged by our friends over there at the demography firm so that NDC can be cognizant of those issues. And frankly, California law wants to make sure you get an ample opportunity to express your communities of interest and wants to be very considerate of that throughout the map drawing process. And then last but not least, although as I noted, you had more recently than a decade ago, you had actually formed your districts. This is a once in a decade opportunity to redistrict. We won't be doing this again until 2031. At that point, using the 2030 census data. So now is the time to speak up and make sure that your voice and information that you have to share is heard, and we can put it to good use as we go about forming districts that we're going to live with for the next 10 years. So these are all great reasons why you should get involved now. Plus, Todd and I are a lot of fun, so why not? All right, so next slide. I think this is the point, Todd, where we start the education, learn from the experts. So I'm going to hand it off to you, and you can take it away from here and just ask to advance slides from Ali as you see fit. The only thing I'll just note is when I have a question I want to raise, I will interrupt you accordingly and ask the question. But with that kind of forewarning, proceed.
Great. Thank you, Ryder. Again, my name's Todd Tatum with National Demographic Corporation, or NDC. I've had 2 trips out to your great city, or we had a hearing on July 27th and a second one on September 28th. And tonight, I just wanted to go back a little and review how we got here. As Ryder mentioned, you went through the districting process not that long ago. You were originally referred to as an at-large city, meaning all 5 of your council members were voted on by everybody in your city. You've moved to districts, and that is where we are at today. We are redistricting or moving the lines based on new census data. Next slide, please, Ali. So just a quick review of the California Voting Rights Act. For those of you who were there the last 2 public hearings, I made mention of why we're here doing this and what brought us to this. Under the Federal Voting Rights Act, a jurisdiction has to fail 4 factual tests before it's a violation of the law. But the California Voting Rights Act made it significantly easier for plaintiffs to force jurisdictions into by-district election. So now the only 2 criteria to force you into by-districts is, does the protected class vote as a block? And do voters who are not in the protected class vote in a block to defeat the preferred candidates of the protected class? They try to determine that the liability is determined only by the presence of racially polarized voting. The bar with the California Voting Rights Act, the bar is now so low that every city, and you'll see in an upcoming slide, who has tried to go against being challenged to go to districts has lost. Next slide, please. This is the impact that the California Voting Rights Act has had on the state of California. I briefly mentioned this in the first 2 hearings, and I don't believe I shared this slide, but there's been at least 240 school districts in our state that have switched or in the process of switching, 34 community college districts, 154 cities, a county board of supervisors, and 35 water and other special districts. In cases so far, Palmdale, Santa Clara, Santa Monica went on trial on the merits. Palmdale and Santa Clara have lost, and you can see in the right column, Palmdale had to pay $4.7 million in their loss. Santa Monica is the only one that is awaiting decision, and that is now at the California Supreme Court. They have spent an estimated, this is the city of Santa Monica, $7 million so far, and the plaintiffs in that case are requesting at least $22 million in legal fees after this trial is over. Next slide, please. So this is the basic timeline in our redistricting process. As I said, we had our 2 initial hearings, July 27th and 28th. Between now and February, we're going to be asking you all to draw maps and designate your communities of interest. We had the census data was released August 12th from the US Census Bureau. However, we could not use that data until the California statewide database released their official, quote, prisoner adjusted districting data. That came out September 21st. There were flaws in the data that the state released, and we got the readjusted prisoner data on September 27th. The holdup through all of this has been the COVID outbreak, as I mentioned in the first two hearings. Otherwise, we would be well on our way. The next two hearings are February 8th and March 8th. The map adoption deadline is April 17th, 2022. And we hope that the selection of the map can occur either February 8th or March 8th, where it could realistically be adopted. Next slide, please.
Actually, if I could just interrupt before I go to the next slide,
Sure.
I want a couple of comments I want to make. So specific to the impact of the coronavirus, under normal circumstances, we would have had this census data back in March, April period, and we would have had it all summer long to assist in this process and make it readily available to folks. So through circumstances beyond the control of the state of California and in DC and the city of 29 Palms, it just hasn't been available. And so everybody saw that there was a freight train coming down the tracks with some very tight timelines to get through. The good news for 29 Palms is that our deadline isn't until April. There are numerous jurisdictions that are facing a December deadline, and they're under very tight time constraints to try to get through this process. So as fast as this process may seem, just know that there are other jurisdictions that are facing even more difficult circumstances in terms of their timing. The second date there, that April 17th date, the reason that date exists is because the city's next elections, where they would actually use new districts, isn't until November. If you had a June date for a primary or a general election for your city, you'd be stuck on that December date. And primarily, my understanding is what drives that April 17th date has a lot to do with the county clerk recorder's ability to take all that map data and properly assimilate it into their system. So they're actually ready to run a open, fair, and properly allocated election by the time November rolls around. Is that correct, Todd?
That is correct.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, these are not dates that have been imposed out of a choice by the city. These are dates that are imposed by the realities of trying to run democracy in America and have a representative government with a proper elections process. And the good news is for 29 Palms is we have breathing room here to get through a process over 4, 5, 6 months, starting in September coming. I mean, we're technically starting back in July, but certainly having data available and holding a workshop like this and allowing time for people to get their hands dirty with some map drawing. We got some time, which is really good news for the city.
Correct. Next slide, please. So these are the redistricting rules and goals. And if you attended the first two hearings, I went through this, so I'll be pretty prompt on this. Number one, we have to follow federal laws, which means equal population. We follow the Federal Voting Rights Act. We have to make sure there's no racial gerrymandering. Number two, the California criteria, which is now ranked, and we have to follow it in ranked order. First being, we have to have districts that are geographically contiguous. We look for undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. We want easily identifiable boundaries, and we want to keep our districts as compact as possible. And also, you'll see that we shall not favor or discriminate against any political party. And I'll say it again, NDC does not produce any data that shows any political party or party affiliation. The other three traditional districting principles that we follow are, we want to minimize voters shifted to different election years. An example of that might be if a district line needs to move and you're in one district that votes in 2022, but the new line puts you in a district that votes in 2024, we really want to minimize that occurring in the redistricting process. We want to respect the voters' choices of continuity in office, meaning they voted for who they want, and we want to respect that. And we also although this does not factor into the drawing of the districts, we also want to look at future population growth and where it might occur in your city, just to keep that in mind, because like Ryder said, I know it sounds a long ways away, 2031, but it'll be here before we know it.
So Todd, there's a couple things I want to dive in on here too. And just keep in mind as we're talking this evening that while there have been and there are recordings available of the prior public hearings, we should also just assume that tonight this is an asset that somebody's going to watch once. So whatever information we want to make sure they need to have, we should talk about this evening and not make sure we're going too quickly through stuff.
Okay.
So a couple key points. First of all, in the discussion about the voting shift, you talked about somebody who was set to vote in 2022 and ends up getting shifted into a district where they vote in 2024. I think the part of the principle there is theoretically, if you were set to vote in 2022, it meant you last voted in 2018. And if you get shifted to an election that won't happen until 2024, instead of voting every 4 years, you're now stuck voting 6 years later. And
Correct.
so you're kind of diminishing somebody's opportunity to cast a vote. And that's one of the fundamental reasons why you avoid people having to shift to different election years. My understanding on future population growth really has to do with potentially only after all these other criteria are considered, and clearly we have an ordering with numbers here to indicate, is that once you get, if you met all these other criteria and you know that there's a particular district that is going to be that's going to grow a lot in the coming years, you may want to underpopulate it a little bit so that as it grows up, it kind of maintains and maybe stays within the boundaries of the variance that's allowed between district sizes and tries to accommodate for that. So I think that's the general sense of where future population growth can be considered. And then two other important points I want to just note, right? So, well, maybe three. Easily identifiable boundaries. We're usually talking there, right, about major roads, flood channels. It could be a big hiking trail that people know about. I mean, all these are really community specific, but we're looking for those things that are clearly identifiable where somebody knows, oh, I live north of X, or I live south of the water tower, or I live over by the train tracks over here. Those are the kind of major landmarks we're looking for as identifiable boundaries. Oftentimes it is streets that is the primary one for that. This idea of compactness. So as it notes here in your parentheticals, we're talking about the arm that reaches up and grabs. And so while you may have historically seen maps where it looks like there's a population here, and then there's a big arm that avoids a population, goes around, grabs another population, that principle has kind of been eliminated in this prioritization list. And now we want to make sure that you don't see those arms reaching out and grabbing populations. Is that a fair description of compact?
That is, yep. And to the extent practicable, we want to achieve compactness and make sure they're geographically contiguous.
Yeah, and geographic contiguous basically means if you were to put a pen down on a piece of paper and draw, you never pick your pen up as you draw that district. So it's all connected entirely. You can't have like a district and then draw an island over here that's disconnected, for example. All right, I just want to make sure I clarified a few of those key points, because those and this finally this item number 2 here in the middle of the criteria, and it is very significant that they now itemize the priorities and the criteria. But this item number 2 about undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest, that's a parenthetical we have there. We're going to have a whole discussion about that tonight. So I want people to just cue in on that particular term. All right, sorry, Todd, for going into deep dive here, but I wanted to drill in on a couple of those things.
That's great. Thank you. Next slide, please. Here we have the demographic summary of your existing districts. This is based on 2020 estimated population. The actual 2020 census data is still being broken out and fed to the mapping software and the mapping tools. So as soon as you get those, which should be in the next couple of weeks, you will have the exact data. But based on these estimates, we believe that these are pretty spot on. And as you can see all the way in the right there, you have a percentage deviation of 13.29%. What we want to make sure is that you are at 10% or less. So some of your districts will obviously be increased while a couple others will be decreased. And you can see that in each of the 5 districts, we want to contain about 5,162 people. And in districts of your size, a swing of 100 residents could throw off the balance of the entire district, and it could be the difference between a legal plan and not a legal plan. And like I said, when you get your paper map kits and your district R mapping tool, which we'll discuss later tonight, the actual census data and demographics will be with those tools. So you'll know exactly how big your current district is and how big it needs to be.
So a couple of things I just need to note real quick. First of all, full quick disclosure for anybody who went on the website prior to about 5 o'clock tonight or 4:30 and downloaded the presentation for tonight. I need to note that we had a correction on that PowerPoint deck, in addition to including some slides that I wanted to add in just for my facilitation purposes. We actually had to update this slide as well and correct some data that was there. So if you downloaded it earlier and that data you see doesn't match what's here, the one that was noted on there as being updated for 10/14, and the one that's there as we speak right now is the correct version. And that's the same PowerPoint deck we're using right now for this presentation. So just to make sure we keep everybody on the same page for anybody on the audience right now who might be seeing some different numbers in this particular space. My apologies for the typo that was on that prior set of data. And then real quick, just to explain a point here, Todd, that 13.29%, we're really looking at the highest high and the lowest low of the deviation that we see. So again, recognizing we're using estimated data. As Doug always likes to say, the only thing we know about estimates is they'll be wrong. But within our best estimates here, we're looking at that District 1, 7.13% saturated population, meaning it's overpopulated by our estimates, and the negative 6.17 District 3 that might be underpopulated. And if you add that to the other negative number, you effectively get the variance between those two, which sum up to 13.29%. And that's the variance that's in excess of 10%. It would suggest that we need to make some movement in lines in order to bring those back into the sub 10% deviation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And on the citizen voting age population, those percentages that you see within each district, those are the actual percentages today, and those numbers will be used in all the data that you see throughout this whole redistricting process.
All right.
Okay.
Next slide.
Please.
So this is the point in time where we wanted to just pause and encourage the public to go ahead and get their questions off their chest and raise your hand. There's a button at the bottom of your screen, I believe. There should be a raise hand function somewhere around here that should allow you to raise your hand. Am I missing that? Allie, I'm not seeing a raise hand feature. So I will do this instead. If you wish to speak, go ahead and unmute yourself and don't say anything. Just unmute yourself. I'll look for the unmute indicator that you have and give you a chance to ask your question. And for demonstration purposes, just to make sure things are working okay right now, I see Frank Lucchino is on the line. Frank, are you able to unmute yourself just to verify for me that you're able to unmute yourself okay?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, very good. All right, so I know you can unmute yourself. Thank you. So is there anybody in the audience who wishes to ask a question? Going once. Going twice. Oh, I see a chat here. Hang on a second. So there's a question here that's being posted. The question is there any requirement for districts to have similar numbers of registered voters?
Districts are based on population solely.
And where does the citizen voting age population factor into that?
That is what the California Voting Rights Act law wants us to be able to produce the demographics on that and show what the percentages are and what the voting age population is. But the actual district themselves is based solely on population totals.
Yeah, and fundamentally the idea is the idea of something that's core to good democracy and representative government. One person, one vote. So you want equal votes. And if you heavily saturate one district over another using criteria other than population, it wouldn't effectively result in equal representation for all people that are contained within each district.
Correct.
Susan, do you have a question? You want to unmute yourself, Susan? Susan, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you real quick and see if I can help you out, okay? Or I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, I sent a chat also.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for your
Great.
patience.
Can you explain how the Marine base is to be drawn in a contiguous manner? You would actually use the description of not having like kind of a sole island floating about, where clearly we're not going to be able to have that continuous line linking in our portion of the base. So how should people go about drawing maps, or can you just provide a little bit more insight on how we should be including that? Obviously, this is a very unique situation for our city. And then also just to touch base on why we're not including the entire base populace. And I think I understand from previous meetings that is due to voter registration, but I thought that we should touch on that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Susan, for those two questions. So Todd, you want to tackle those?
Sure. And if you look at the current map, and this did come up in our last public hearing, the current map shows your 5 districts, and then you'll look up by the base and you will see sort of a little odd shape that has the same 5 colors of the 5 districts. What we did last time around was looked at the population of the base, which is roughly around 9,000 plus people. There are currently just a little over 600 registered voters. And in the last election cycle, only a little over 300 people actually voted. The residents on the base, those that are in the military, are prohibited from running for local government positions, such as your city council. What occurred last time, and the California Voting Rights Act, as I mentioned, allows your district needs to be contiguous where practicable. And this is one of the exceptions to that rule. Because the base has almost double what one of your districts has, the best way to represent the population on that base was to divide it up where every council member basically has, quote unquote, a piece of the base. So those folks on the base can see that they are represented by every council member. And again, if you look at the current maps, if you go online and see your current maps on the city website, you'll notice that little blob, which would be up in the top right there, showing how the base is divided up. And that is, again, one of the few exceptions to the California Voting Rights Act that says contiguous districts that the law allows. So I hope that answered your question.
So she had 2 questions. I want to make sure. I was also trying to chat with my team to make sure I'm addressing technical questions I have here. But she asked both the question about that, and then she asked about the voter registration question. Was that also addressed in your answers? I heard you discussing some registered voter issues.
Yeah, at the base, right. There's a little over 600 people registered to vote. In last election cycle, only 300, a little over 300 voted.
All right, Susan, did we sufficiently answer your question for you?
Yeah, that answers it. And that was kind of my understanding from watching the public hearings previously, I just wanted to touch base for anybody else that might be joining in on this. And anybody who's interested in, I'm jumping ahead, in drawing their own maps, should we be including the base at that point, or looking at that as just kind of a satellite location that will probably be applied in the manner that it was a few years ago, with just like a little piece of the pie?
Yeah, it'll be a piece of the pie, Susan, that you'll be able to see. You'll be able to pull up again through the map drawing process, the online tool, District R, that we'll go through later, as well as the paper map kits. It will reflect that same area up there. So, you know, you could draw it the way you deem fit, but you'll be able to look at the way it is now and compare your map to that.
And one last question, and then I'll let you move on. I'm sure you have a lot to cover. Will that mapping give us the head count, like how many people will be added? Because if we're looking at trying to keep like an equal, well, I guess if it's an equal number, it's always an equal number, because it would be a slice of the pie of the base. So I guess it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, and I was amazed, especially the online mapping too, but as well as the paper map kits. On the online mapping tool, everything is broken down by census block. So as you drag your cursor across each census block, you can see on the right-hand side the amount of population, and it'll add up. So you'll know what the number that you want to hit is roughly 5,162. And you can see as you're coloring in the census blocks, the numbers going up. And so you'll be able to populate each district that way.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Absolutely, Susan. That's why we're doing this meeting. So thanks for asking the question, because now we have it recorded and other people will benefit from asking it. So I appreciate you asking a question that others might very well have. We had a question come in from Teeny as well. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. The question is, are people who live on base not a community of interest? I think partly our answer here, if I could just interject, maybe I'm wrong here, Todd, but it's not really for us to determine what the communities of interest are necessarily. I mean, we can certainly look at indicators like specific plans and HOAs and other factors that are often recognized as communities of interest. But having said that, how would you go about answering that question?
That's one I'm not really sure about, Ryder. It is a good question. I assume that there could be and probably will be folks from the base who want to be part of this process, and they could look at themselves as a community of interest. With that in mind, probably we could get to the same end result that we did in the last districting, where we made sure that all the council people had a piece of the base that they got to represent. Otherwise, based on the voter registration and the fact that those people that live there cannot run for city council, it's a unique community of interest. And I'm just not sure how to address, how that would turn into the communities of interest that Ryder just gave an example of: HOA, specific plans, master plan communities, that sort of thing. But I can find out and make sure that answer is available.
Yeah, I think partly it would be inappropriate for us to presuppose that there are communities of interest necessarily. We welcome feedback from members of the base to identify as such, or for others to help assist in that. And then I think there are also just some interesting questions that come up about bases in particular. I mean, one thing you have with the base is there's a lot of people that come and go. So that community of interest is really transient. So it's a constantly changing communities of interest, which is also kind of a unique experience for that. But again, we need to hear from the people. That's the point of this process and why we have hearings and whatnot. So, all right, thank you for that. And next, anybody else got a question? And if you want to just so I think the way we're going to handle questions here, and my apologies, because the raise hand feature is not working the way I expected. So what we have instead is, if you want to chat, just chat me, Ryder at Tripepi Smith, and then I will read your question off if you want, or just say, I have a question. We can unmute you or ask you to go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll call out your name. So does anybody have any other questions they want to ask? And I'll allow for a few seconds of awkward silence while we accommodate this process. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So Todd, why don't we move on to the next phase of this presentation, which is really where we're going to get into a discussion about these neighborhoods and communities of interest. And what's going to happen here is Todd's going to spend a few minutes explaining these ideas. Then we're going to bring up a slide that is really a list of probing questions that we ask people to chew on and think about as they consider communities of interest and identifying those. And then through the chat feature, we'll have people indicate their desire to speak up and express and identify some communities of interest in 29 Palms area. And at that point, Allie on our team is going to be sharing her screen, and you'll see what looks like a Word document or a Google document, and she'll be furiously typing away, trying to make notes about where you identify communities of interest. And I'll have a few comments to lead into that discussion as we get there. So with that, Allie, if you go to the next slide, let's give Todd a chance to talk a little bit about communities of interest.
Great. This slide refers to defining neighborhoods. And if you've watched or attended the last two public hearings, you know, this is something that I've asked the community to really be involved in. We want to know what your neighborhood is and what its geographic boundaries are. And the examples of the physical features that define your neighborhood are natural neighborhood dividing lines, such as highways, major roads. I know there are no rivers out there, but there could be drainage areas, canals. There's definitely hills. Any areas around parks or schools or other neighborhood landmarks that we as demographers don't know because we don't live in your city. We want to hear from you what those ideas of your neighborhood are. And in the absence of anybody sharing that with us, we have to go on planning records and other similar documents that may be used. Next slide, please. But we also want you to go one step beyond defining your neighborhood, and that's the communities of interest. We want you to define what those are. So it could be a geographic area, and it could also be a shared issue or a characteristic. It could be shared social or economic interests. It could be impacted by county policies. We need you to tell us what your community story is. And, you know, it could be any sort of thing. Ryder brought up earlier, it could be a specific plan. It could be an HOA. You could live in a manufactured home community. You could live in a neighborhood community that seems to be all your own. We need you to tell us how you would benefit as a community of interest to be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. Or would your community, for some reason, benefit from having more than one representative? Now, communities of interest cannot include relationships with political parties, incumbents, or political candidates.
So I guess a couple points there, right? Like if you have a big cadre of registered voters of a certain party affiliation, as you note, that is not a community of interest. If they also happen to share some other characteristics that are socioeconomically aligned or are shared by an impact of county policies, then those are the criteria that we're really looking for that would unite a community of interest. Todd is working in several jurisdictions on these issues, and I think, you know, generally he likes to make sure he leaves it as wide open as possible without putting his thumbprint on what those communities of interest might be, because we genuinely want to hear from the community on them. I will share stories from other areas where we've had some interesting communities of interest identified. Doing some work up in the Central Valley, people identified the soil type, defining communities of interest, because depending on the soil type, it would have a certain impact on the crops that are grown and the nature of the communities that best work in or have a history of servicing those crops or the livestock. We've had communities of interest identified around kind of cowboy culture and urban versus rural. So we were out in a coastal community, and their city hall had a like a boot brush at the front entryway, so you could get the mud and caked on cow dung off your boots before you walked into City Hall. And although they were in an urban area, they knew they had constituencies that were more out in rural spaces and had different interests and needs, and might show up at City Hall with some cow muck stuck to the bottom of their shoes. So, and then in other areas, we've had, for example, fire hazard zones where there's been high fire issue zones. And those people who live in that area, they might have a lot of diversity among them and other interests and political interests and ethnicity and whatnot, but they're all united in a concern about fire and fire risk for their communities that are in that what are called wildland urban interface areas. So all sorts of criteria could show up as a community of interest. And, we'd rather hear about the possibility of a community of interest than not from folks out here. Let's go to the next slide real quick, Allie. So this is your turn, right? We talked a lot about how the experts wanted to talk with you tonight for a while. Now it's your turn to be the experts back and share with us what your communities of interest are. And think about these questions seriously and grab a screen grab of this or go to the website and download the tonight's version of the PowerPoint deck that we released, and that'll have this slide in there. But I think these questions here are a great way to give thought to what are the communities of interest? What are some common characteristics that unite us? Where, if we go to meet together as a community, where do we go to meet? And what is it about that place that brings us together as a community? What are some areas that benefit from staying together in a district? Those are really the kinds of things we want to hear about tonight. So I'm going to pause for a second here and let you kind of all dwell on this for a minute or two. And then I'm going to ask you to indicate via chat that you have some communities of interest you'd like to speak up on, and I will call out your name and ask you to unmute yourself. And in about a minute, Allie will change screens from this PowerPoint deck and into a written document where she'll be taking some notes and typing while you rattle off your communities of interest. And the other thing I'd love for you to give some thought to when you express this is to try to give us some boundaries, right? Give us some street names or give us some other geographic elements that help set some barriers or parameters around where that community of interest actually lies. So we'll have 30 seconds of awkward silence here. And if somebody wants to be the brave first soul to indicate with a chat that they have a community of interest they want to talk about, do so. And I would love to see it pop up, and we'll get this party rolling. There's a question, by the way, that came in about, will we be able to submit comments by writing later? 1000% yes. So the risk of getting too far ahead, Holly, would you go to the very last slide? Thank you, Allie. So I just want to make a point about this too. Some folks might get bashful. They're busy, or they just aren't in a position tonight right now to perhaps articulate their communities of interest. So first of all, the city launched a dedicated website for this entire project called draw29palms.org. On that website is both a phone number to call if you have some questions or things you want to clarify. That calls, I believe it calls to the city clerk's office. And then there's an email address for the city clerk herself. And one of the things that you can do is you can submit public record feedback and information through that email address that you see there on the website or on the screenshot that we have going on. I will also note that there is there's a tool on the website. I believe it's under community survey. Is that correct, Allie? That's under community survey?
Correct.
Thank you. Where you can actually, there's a whole form there to fill out for expressing your communities of interest as well. So if you don't want to express it tonight, there's ample opportunity to express that. All we would ask is that you try to do it in the next couple of months before we have a hearing, because we want to take that community of interest feedback sooner rather than later, and make sure we work it into any maps that are developed in conjunction, of course, with any maps that you all choose to submit. There's a question about, do the emails go to NDC or to someone who works for the city. So the email address that's on here goes to somebody who works at the city. I believe the form on the website goes to a generic email box at the city that then forwards on to both my team and the team at NDC and maintains itself as part of the public record. And when we do the next hearing, we actually take advantage of the public record information that's submitted, and we'll publish out that information as well so that the rest of the public benefits from the feedback that was provided to us for the communities of interest. So again, the city's very committed to transparency in this process, and we make sure that whatever feedback you have to offer becomes part of that public record. Obviously tonight we'll be recording it and hearing your words when you express them, but in addition, if you submit through the forms or an email and express it as a community of interest, then that also goes into the public record, and Todd will end up with that content as well. So let me play catch up here because we got some good people that are typing away here. So give me 1 second to play catch up. So Allie, why don't you go ahead and flip your screen back to sharing your like a Word document. I'm going to call out an opportunity for folks to speak up. The first one I'd like to invite, I will just say the letters, it's EVKJ. If you want to unmute yourself, I'd love to hear you express your communities of interest.
Great, hello. Thank you so much for holding this Zoom informative lecture. We live in a fairly rural area west of the city proper, and natural boundaries look like it's sort of just past Lear Avenue. So it really, the boundaries would be Shoshone to the west and Easy Street to the east. We're sort of nestled, our whole neighborhood, most of our neighborhood rather, is sort of nestled like right in the Cove area where 49 Palms Oasis exists.
Is there a name for your neighborhood?
There's not really, no. It's
okay.
I mean, there's part of it is Sherman Heights. Part of it, people refer to it as like down by the VCA of 29 Palms, like the animal hospital. We are all affected by the sort of the same power outages when SCE goes down. And we all have sort of like we're all in a more rural area than the city itself.
Okay.
So I would love to see our neighborhood established as a community of interest insofar as that applies.
In other words, you're expressing as a community of interest that should remain whole so that it's theoretically aligned within one
correct
council district.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Very good. And I think, Allie, the other, I think I heard it was also Lear Avenue was another one of the streets.
Lear, yeah. So it's past Lear, so Shoshone. Really, the street would be Shoshone to Easy Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. So we got that. So it's Shoshone to Easy Street. Excellent.
Yeah. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Way to get us rolling. That was excellent feedback. Thank you. You set the tone for the night. All right. So next up, there's a comment here. So I'll just read this off, Allie. Indian Cove is currently split. So let's play with that neighborhood and why it's currently split, if you're looking for an example to showcase the tool. So I think this is partly a comment about a future tool demonstration. And it's also just, actually, I'm not sure if Susan is expressing that the current split in Indian Cove is a good thing or a bad thing, other than just noting that it's split. But I'm sure somebody, I've heard of Indian Cove previously in some communication, so I suspect we'll hear some more about that. And then we did have the one question. So it's noted, by the way, that Shoshone is Shone, which I think is Shoshone is a Native American reference. All right. Excellent. Good job. Thank you, EVKJ, for your feedback. So does somebody else have some additional feedback along those lines that they would like to share? Also, by the way, Allie, would you mind just bumping up your Zoom a little bit so your text is bigger? Old man eyes here. It's killing me. You can use the Zoom feature inside of, okay. All right, go ahead, Teeny, if you want to offer some feedback.
Yeah, I'm also in Indian Cove, and we are we should definitely be, I think, one district. And we're the neighborhood that is just west of the 49 Palms, Oasis, Sherman Highlands neighborhood. I would disagree that Shoshone is the boundary. I would say it's actually the topographical feature of Rattlesnake Wash, which really sort of divides the neighborhood. There's a big gap in houses there. There's only like a handful of houses between Rattlesnake and Wash and Shoshone. So there's like 5 houses, but I think that you have to access them through the Indian Cove side. So I feel they're a different neighborhood. So yeah, I would agree that on the south side, the national park boundary is the southern boundary of Indian Cove. And on the east side, I would say it's the Rattlesnake Canyon. And then it's a little less well-defined on the north and west sides. But we are all we're all one community of interest, and we're dealing with similar issues here in Indian Cove. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess, and actually, team, before you go, I just want to make sure I clarify your comment about Indian Cove. It's making it sound like Indian Cove is a superset that includes this first area that was identified by EVKJ. Is that correct?
No, we're the neighborhood just to the west
Okay,
of that.
separate neighborhood.
And
okay.
we EVKJ and I have just defined things. She's used a road and I've used a topographical feature. So there's a slight overlap of maybe like a quarter mile between our two definitions is all.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. All right. Anybody else have some feedback that they would like to offer this evening on communities of interest? This could include other neighborhoods, maybe where you don't live, but where you identify them as a community of interest or recognize them. Tini, go ahead, please.
In the current districts, the Highway 62 is really used as a dividing factor. And I understand that it's a major roadway, but I think that the communities, it's more of like a scale. So really the farther away you get from downtown, so the farther west on 62 you get, the more the communities on both the north and south side have to do with each other. So I'm on the south side of 62. I have a lot more in common with the people directly across from 62 from me than I do the people a mile down from 62 from me, if that makes sense.
So you're saying that there's communities of interest that are aligned together north-south and proximate to the highway than necessarily east-west of each other.
I think that the communities, if you think of it, it's hard to describe, but I think the communities sort of, the same distance from downtown. So if you move like 5 miles down 62, the communities on the north and south side of 62 have more in common. So it's used as a dividing factor, but it should be more considered of sort of, a distance from downtown as sort of a way to understand what people have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that, I think, you can find it. I think it's reflected in the city zoning map too, some of those divisions.
Okay. Allie, if you get a chance, send me a hyperlink to your document, please. And so I can help you out with it. Thank you, Tini. I appreciate your feedback. Anyone else want to offer some feedback? I will just note too that in addition to the notes we're taking here, we will also, of course, have the audio recording of this. So that'll be helpful as well to clarify any of our notes that are not quite on par with exactly what was expressed. All right. I am not seeing additional comments or expressions of anybody who wants to, I haven't seen any more chats come through to me that anybody wants to talk. Let me just give another 30 seconds of that for an opportunity to express themselves. Also, friendly reminder that this isn't the only forum and opportunity, and that really submitting through the website with some nice verbal or written typed feedback on communities of interest can be immensely helpful as well. And that is available 24/7. So We'll give it another 15 seconds here. And if there's somebody who wishes to speak and they can't get the chat to work and you want to just unmute yourself, feel free to unmute yourself and we'll welcome the feedback as well. We got a small enough audience here that we don't have to worry about a million people unmuting themselves simultaneously. Okay, well, like I said, this is not the end. This is just starting in the process. And for all those that are watching this video after we've recorded it, visit please the draw29palms.org website. There's a form there under the community survey where you can submit your community of interest information. That is super helpful to the overall process. It's something the state of California really wanted to encourage with the Fair Maps Act. We would definitely welcome you all submitting that information through that in your own words, in your own handwriting. We obviously have your recordings, the audio recordings from this evening, and that is very helpful as well. Please tell your friends about communities of interest. And if you identify other neighborhoods that come to mind, please feel free to talk about those. I guess one other thing before we leave this topic, are there any other, like for example, Teeny had noted a mention of the fact that when you go east-west from downtown, you tend to find communities that are along that that are more in her perspective, more communities of interest, right? So 5 miles out of town, there's a community of interest there that even though there's a highway running between them, they're connected on both sides of that highway. So that kind of begs the question, if we don't use the highway as a dividing line, what are the obvious dividing lines that are out there that people recognize in the community? So I'd like to just pause for a minute and see if anybody wants to identify some other geographic characteristics, railroads, other major, maybe north-south roads that provide some sense of definition in the area that people can easily recognize or talk about. And you can feel free to either chat those to me, or you can just indicate that you want to be unmuted and let me know, and we'll call upon you to speak up. So I see some direct notes here for several items. So let me just add these real quick, Ellie. So hang on one second. Thank you, Teeny. Any other geographically significant locations anybody wants to denote, or that people universally recognize in the community that makes it easy to say, I am north of X or south of Y or east of Z or whatever the case may be? Okay. One thing you're good at in this profession is awkward, silent pauses. All right, very well. Let's go ahead and move on with the rest of the PowerPoint deck. Ali, if you'd flip back to your screen and get us to the PowerPoint deck. And recall that we had forwarded to several slides, so we need to get back. Perfect. Thank you, Ali. Let's go forward one slide real quick. Just a reminder that these communities of interest questions are in the PowerPoint deck that's available on the website for tonight's meeting. So feel free to go find that PowerPoint deck, download the PDF, and take a look at those questions and revisit the communities of interest and natural kind of locations to find ways to divide up districts. So with that, Todd, I think we're now in the software demo phase of this presentation. So you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you. Here you see the public mapping tools that 29 Palms is going to use. And we've got tools for every level of technology comfort. The first tool you see there in this slide are the paper map kits. And it's exactly that. It is paper maps. The city will be outlined, as well as you'll see lines for current districts. It will have population for the areas within the city. The drawback on using strictly a paper map is you will have to calculate yourself how many people are in each district that you draw and highlight. There's an Excel supplement that goes along with that that makes the drawing of it easier and also allows you to include some of the demographic data that we produce. So it's basically, I would call that a paper map on steroids. And if you feel comfortable using Excel, it's a fun tool to use. But by no means, don't think that just because you are using a paper map doesn't mean that you won't produce a map that, number one, might be the perfect map, and that, number two, we will not take into account, because we will take into account every map submitted, paper or via the web with the online tool. We have the simple online data review tool that's going to be available to you, and that will allow you to compare the draft maps that have been produced. And if you'll see when we get back to that last slide, there is a tab on the website that says draft maps. Everybody's map that's submitted will be housed in that area of the website. So you can go on the interactive review map and compare your map to, say, the current districts. You can compare, Todd's map to Ryder's map to Joe's map to Diane's map. However you want to do it, or you can compare your map number 1 to your map number 2. The third online community mapping tool, and I'm going to share my screen now and give you a little demonstration of it. This is one of the most powerful online mapping tools there is. However, it is also one of the easiest. It's called District R. District R was invented, and it is run by a group at Tufts University, which is just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And as you can see, as I scroll down, it gives you a little example how you can draw your community. And just so you know, when District R goes live to the 29 Palm Redistricting website, there will also be a demonstration video for you to watch that will explain it all and show you how easy it is to use. So when you first start out, when this is linked to your website, you'll go to a landing page that's specifically designated for 29 Palms. But for this demonstration, we're going to start at the beginning, just like you would if you pulled up District R on your own. We pulled up California, we go to cities. These are cities that are currently have District R for districting or redistricting purposes. So I'm just going to pick a city because 29 Palms has not been put in yet. The data has been sent to Tufts and it is being loaded. We hope to have it done in the next couple of weeks. But I'll pick a city, just Lake Elsinore, because I know they have 5 council districts. As you can see on the right-hand side, you get the different, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Up here is the allows you to pan. It looks like a hand. So you can move the city around. I am going to go to data layer and I'm going to ask for the current districts. These are the current districts right now within Lake Elsinore. Over here, you can populate by citizen voting age population, and it will tell you in each one, after you draw your districts, where you're at within that. Each district, it'll break it down based on what percentage shows up in the district that you drew. So we'll go back to population. We want to use population balance. We're going to highlight, use the paintbrush. You can make your brush size big or small. We'll start off fairly good size. We're going to start off with District 1, which is the blue color. And I'm just going to, I don't know if this is District 1 for Lake Elsinore, but for demonstration purposes, this is what we're going to use. And as you see down here, the ideal size for each of the 5 districts in this city is 13,374. So as I put my cursor over it, hold down on my mouse, we're drawing districts. It's as easy as this. And as you can see right now, there are only 82 people populated within the district that I'm drawing. And obviously I've hit a populated spot within the city of Lake Elsinore. We're now at 6,994, coloring it all in. Going over this way. Now I'm going to stop there and say, okay, my paintbrush is obviously pretty big, and I picked up this area within a couple of other districts. You can go right up here to the erase, click on that, and let's get back into the district where we were. And as you'll see, the population drops immediately. Go back to our paintbrush. Let's make it a little smaller. And let's start adding more to that first district. Okay, we're a little over. We'll go back, take one out. We're going to end with that. So let's say that's the number that we want. You've drawn this district and you know that all the blue area is what you want in the district that you just drew. Maybe we'll take that out just to look a little better. So you go up here, you hit save, then it's going to give you a copy. Right here, you'll see the link that you can email. You can email that link to a friend. You can email it to somebody else that you're drawing with. If you're doing this as a team, you know, you might want to call this, you know, demo 1. We would call this, you know, 29 team demo map 1. I'm not going to save it in here just because it will save to District R on behalf of Lake Elsinore, but you could save it. Now, let's say you want to go back, you're not ready to. Looks like maybe I saved it, sorry. We want to go back and draw more. Well, I believe that I save that as a draft. Bear with me for a second, please.
We're bearing with you, Todd. Don't you worry about it, buddy.
Thanks. We'll go back to a new plan. Sorry about that. And I'll show you the difference in drawing more than one district. The problem is, and Allie, I don't know if you can help me, but right where it says that I am speaking, I'm trying to get to the
Is Zoom overtaking your
yeah,
computer?
the Zoom is not allowing me to hit the color blocks that you all see. So, you know, back if we were back to doing 1 and we got done. Let me see if it'll, oh, there.
on it.
Now let
You're
me
on it.
hit
You
2.
got it.
So then you would go to 2, the different, and you could see as you populate 2, you know, you may want to jump over here and let's make, you know, this one 5. And it's as easy as that. It shows you all across each district what the population is. You don't have to save the map. Like I said, you can, as you're drawing, if it doesn't look right, you can go back, you can erase areas, you can use the current district lines as a guide. However, you don't have to use the district lines. You know, if you take out the that data layer, then you're just drawing whatever district you see fit. And again, this is a simple, easy, interactive way to draw districts, and you can do as many maps as you would like on this. They will be saved to the map area on the web page. And hopefully you all enjoyed that little demonstration. I wish I was a little more tech savvy on that, but Believe me, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Ali, you want to go back to sharing your screen? So important to note too that there are software demo explainer videos that are available that walk you through the details, and it really is paint by numbers to put those things together. The important thing is we're waiting for that map to become available with the actual modified or California adjusted census data, right? Right, Todd?
Correct, yes.
So,
And that data has been sent, like for District R, that has been sent to Tufts University. It's being loaded now. We hope to have that within the next 2 weeks. The paper maps are being put together now. We do that internally. So that's being worked on now. Hopefully we can get that out within the next 2 weeks. And the paper maps, just to highlight that, you will be able to download a PDF version from the website of the paper map, or you can go to City Hall and pick up the paper map kits there.
yeah. So we're talking about a lot of things that are to come. Those things are all being in process, and that's why it's really important to stay connected with the outreach efforts going on with the city, and to follow the city's website and follow their social media, or feel free to use those contact information details that we offered before to stay in touch with the community over the city about this process, so we can alert you when those maps become available. And when they do, they'll be automatically available on the city's website. And then the tool to monitor map submissions will also be available through that draw29palms.org website. Let's go to the next slide, Allie. So just a reminder of the timeline that we're looking at here, folks. We are we're doing this October 14th public workshop sometime mid-October. And again, this is kind of beyond the control of NDC or the city right now. We're waiting for Tufts University and whatnot to load their data. But once those systems are loaded, then we will have the tools available for all the mapping tools, and the software will be available as well. Then you'll have all of November, all of December, most of January, at least a good chunk of January, to submit maps to be reviewed by the demographer. And then that'll all be, they're all due on the 28th. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Todd, but they're all due on the 28th because that needs to leave time for you and the team at NDC to look at those maps and annotate on those maps so that they're ready for presentation of the third public hearing, correct?
Correct. But I also want to stress that if you miss that deadline, you can also submit your maps up until the March 1st deadline. And those maps can also be presented to the council at the March 8th meeting.
Yes.
But ideally, we'd like them January 28th.
Well, and if not sooner. I would assume,
yes.
like, to some extent, if you get a chance to see a map sooner, then that's even better. And I would, I think this is the case still, that if there is some confusion about the map that you submit or some issue, Todd will want to, or the team at NDC will want to review that in time and be able to ask you questions to make sure that they properly understand what information you're attempting to convey. So if you submit early enough, you'll give them more time to be able to be responsive and engaging with you on the map itself. So just keep that in mind. So ultimately, we're looking at a March 8th goal for adoption. Clearly, that's a month in advance of this deadline that is beyond the city's control. We absolutely must be done by April 17th. And so we picked that date. City has picked that date because they want to make sure there's plenty of headroom to get this done properly. Because normally there's only 2 council meetings a month, and you don't want to end up running out of council meetings to get this done in a proper format. All these are public hearings. Public will have a right to speak at each one of these. Todd will be either virtually or on site in the city there for those hearings to make presentations and present the maps and engage in the public participation process. And the public is encouraged to be involved in that process, certainly. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the slide we shared before. Cannot emphasize enough. Please visit our draw29palms.org website, bookmark it, check it out. Under that drafts map section, that's where we're going to see, if you look at that menu bar there, that's where you're going to find the maps that have been submitted and been kind of reviewed by NDC and then made available for review by the public. Draw map is where we're going to have the links to all the resources and tools and the PDF download kits and whatnot to really empower the public to be involved in this map drawing process. And, I think Todd would tell you, in an ideal world, the map that ultimately is adopted by the city council is drawn by somebody out there in the public who participates in this process and comes up with a cool map that is consistent with communities of interest, addresses any of the federal and state legal requirements, and represents the best of your local knowledge and expertise to help create the map that's going to govern how the city elects its representative for the next 10 years. So it's an important process to be involved with, and we love it when it's a citizen map that makes it through to be adopted. If you have questions, give a call to that phone number, drop an email to the city clerk, or submit your communities of interest through the cities through this website under the community survey feature. I will just note that especially right now, while we're still waiting for the official map drawing tools to come in, the single best thing you can do as an active and involved community member, clearly you are because you showed up here tonight, is submit your communities of interest and give thought to those communities of interest and tell your friends and your neighbors about this website where they can submit that information. I think with that, it brings us to a conclusion this evening. I want to thank all the members of the public who participated tonight. As I noted before, democracy works best when the public is involved. You have helped make democracy better tonight by being here. I want to thank Todd from National Demographics Corporation for sharing his time and expertise this evening and leading us through this presentation. And my thanks to Ali and Danielle on the back end who helped us with the engineering and managing through this process. Please stay connected with the city. We thank you for your time and have a great night out there in 29 Palms.